What language do you dream in?
I primarily dream in English. I will occasionally have dreams that drift into like German. Um, there's some pretty rare ones that drift into Russian and French, and those are the only ones that kind of surface. But they're rare. I mean, it's like once every 6 months.
I heard it is that if you start dreaming in the language, then you start to feel like you're getting it.
Yes and no. So there's a I don't know, anecdote. I think just like a pretty consistent thing. For the Middlebury immersion schools in Vermont, they like I started dreaming in German in 2 weeks, and that was my first exposure to German, and everyone else was too. So you can force your brain to do a thing. The dreams are dumb. I mean, it was just a bunch of me like this. It was like das ist blau, das ist auch blau, das ist blau. It was just like this is blue stuff everywhere, and it's like I've never had a dumber dream actually than my first dreams in German. But if you are exposed to a thing and you stay in that thing and you never like violate that thing, your brain will just trip into that thing within a couple of weeks. Does that mean that you are now fluent in that language? Like I sure wasn't. I could just name that things were blue. But I think it is a good sign that you're giving yourself the right stimulus, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you're done. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like it's neat watching what your brain does when it's exposed to different things. Like I think that's one of the fun things about language is just like let's give it weird stuff and see what happens.
If you want to learn a language efficiently, you have to give that language life. That came from your TED talk. Talk to me about that.
So I think one of the problems with language learning, like I spent 7 years failing to learn Hebrew. I spent like 5.5 years failing to learn Russian. And in those experiences, I was a good student. I could memorize lots of stuff. I was able to say the things that were needed for my tests. But I never spoke those languages. I mean, eventually later I learned Russian. But I had to do it basically from scratch. And I think so many of us have this like failed trauma experience with languages where we've put in the time and then we got nowhere. And I think that's because those experiences were lifeless. I think there's this idea of, if I tell you, the Hungarian word for camera is, fényképezőgép. The Hungarian word for computer is számítógép. Like, you've learned nothing. Like this is you. I've told you random terms you don't care about in a language that sounds really weird, and giving you no reason to hold on to any of it. And so it is extremely likely that you will forget all of that stuff like the second I say it. Maybe you'll hold on to it for 30 seconds. The idea that if you can hold on to it for 5 minutes, it's because you're being stubborn. Like it's not because you actually learned anything or wanted to learn anything. It's because I've said, you can't learn this. And you're like, yes, I can. You just repeat it, samitogabe, and you like fought your way through. So, but like in contrast, if you go to some restaurant and they give you something and you're like, this is delicious. What is this called? And they're like, oh, this is a gordita or something. And you're like, oh shit, like I need that. Like I'm going to remember this thing, or this is barbacoa. And you're like, barbacoa is delicious. I want that all the time. No one has a problem remembering food names because food names are delicious and you care about them because food is awesome. And so anytime that something matters to you, we stop having problems with vocabulary. We stop having problems with retention because those things mean things to us. We care about them. And our brains are designed to hold on to things we care about, or things that are important. Our brains there's like a really nice filter in our brains designed to dump out everything that is unimportant and meaningless and keep everything that is living and essential. And most language learning forgets that those filters exist or doesn't know those filters exist. And so you're trying to fight this very robust, well-built filter all the time. And the second you actually move with that filter and you say, hey, I want to learn things I care about. And here I'm gonna frame it in a way that I actually do care, then it's easy. And you're just going to restaurants, eating things, basically. It's the same experience, like in terms of retention. And so that for me is this idea of life. You need to infuse everything you're learning in a new language with some reason why you need to care about it. And that needs to land for your brain. And you can't cheat. Like you can hack it. You can figure out how to like okay, I really do care about like how to say, dog in Hungarian. And then you can try to like frame that language in a way, kutya, in a way that like actually matters, because you're like, oh, kutya, I'm Norbert. Like suddenly now my dog, his name is Norbert, and I care about that kutya. And suddenly now kutya starts meaning something for me, but not for you. Like, you don't care about Norbert. You don't know Norbert. And so you can't steal my meaning and I can't steal yours. And so that's, I think, pretty essential to this thought of like, well, why do we suck at this so much? And how do we do something better? And it comes down to this idea of words really meaning something.
My personal experience with this has been through learning a language that it's been a tough ride taking because so much of the learning is written and then you're hearing it, or you're trying to speak it and put pronunciation to one side, but just purely trying to get the mouth moving to say the words in the right way. But more often than not, you're reading it, writing it, and then hearing it. But sometimes, for me, that missing piece is you seeing it, right? Is if I'm to say I have something, like actually, what does it mean? Like to have something, like what is it you are trying to say? And for me, that disconnection personally, and I've spoken to other people about this that have the same thing, is that you kind of robotically learn these phrases and you feel like they're just going to plug in and play. But that's not how we're even having this conversation right now, right? It's a very fluid, natural, moving conversation because my brain is working to say the things I want to say and I'm then verbalizing it. And there's all this processing that's going on. But as soon as it comes to learning a language, it feels like insert phrase that I've learned from X book over here, but kind of don't know how it feels. I guess even it's this feeling, right, of like, what does it mean? So I don't know if that makes any sense and if you can speak to that and what's going on in that process.
There is a tendency to, I think because we understand translation, that you can go watch a French movie and you can have subtitles on it and you're like, oh, I get it. This sentence means that. This means that. And so if I can just keep saying A equals B, whatever, A equals X, and I just keep memorizing enough of those things, then eventually I'll be able to translate fast enough that I can have a conversation. And that is not how any of this works. Translating is hard. Speaking is not necessarily hard. I'm not sitting here in English, like calculating, like, what is the right object and how do I say the right thing? And I'm not thinking about grammar right now. I'm just saying stuff. And our brains are really good at learning how to just say stuff. You can stick basically anyone into an immersion situation, and if they will tolerate it from a stress standpoint, because it is super stressful to lose your language, then very, very soon they will start speaking that language. They'll start dreaming in that language, as we said earlier. Like, your brain figures out how to say the things that are in your head. That's just a thing our brains are extremely good at. But our brains are not good at translation. I mean, simultaneous translators, I think back in 2014, when I wrote the first edition of the book, they were getting paid like $200, $250 an hour, because that's one of the most stressful jobs, period. And the idea that like learning a language successfully means you've become a good simultaneous translator, like that's ridiculous. Like, very few people will be able to pick up the ability to do simultaneous translation. And those people, they're able to think in the target language. They're able to think in two different languages fluently, just talk. Just this thing we're talking about is just like thought in head, thought comes out of mouth, like that thing. They're able to do that in two languages. And on top of it, they're able to compare both of those languages and say, okay, this one looks like that. That one looks like that. This is the right translation for this thing. They're doing like multiple things at once. That's an unfair ask for any mere mortal. Like, we just talk, so we should probably learn how to just talk. And I think a lot of language classes and a lot of just like study methodologies are all about like, well, if I just memorize enough phrases, V Gates, how are you? How are you doing? How are you doing? How are things? That's the same as V Gates. So I'm just going to remember V Gates Dio, V Gates Ihnen, V. Okay, I'm just going to keep memorizing this phrase enough. Then eventually, when I walk in front of a German person, I'll be like, hey, V Gates. And like, no, you won't. You're going to walk up in front of that German person and be like, oh crap, what was that translation? That meant nothing. It had no life to it, so I can't remember it. if you can eventually get yourself to remembering the thing, you're going to say the thing. They're going to then speak back to you in a bunch of German, and you're going to not necessarily be able to parse that fast enough because, again, you're translating in your head. And then you might have also like missed the point that like Germans don't greet each other with Wie geht's really. And like when they're asking each other, how are you doing? They mean it. And like, they're like, no, I'm doing terribly. Like my mother just like got Alzheimer's, like this. And you're suddenly in this like deep, dark conversation when you just wanted to greet someone because you used a translation, and translations are always pretty terrible at actually conveying meaning because words don't translate and phrases don't translate from language to language. There's always something missing. There's always some cultural subtext, usage subtext, just like old stories that are connected to things that you didn't even know about because you didn't grow up there. Like there's all this stuff that you lose with translation. And the idea that like somehow you can successfully learn a language by memorizing a bunch of those is insane to me.
What are some of the mistakes that people make when learning a new language?
I mean, the translation thing is a big one. Memorizing translations is the fastest way to ram into that filter and fail to learn anything. I think one of the most common ones is that people learn the language before they learn pronunciation. And I think people don't even understand that they can learn pronunciation first. I think there's a sense of, oh, well, if I have a good accent, that means I'm fluent or something. It's a place where I just got lucky in that I came from a music background. I was an opera singer in my 20s. And so we all learned pronunciation first. And then I showed up in French and I knew how to pronounce things in French. I didn't know the language. I just knew the pronunciation system. And I found that I could learn words really quickly. And I think one of the issues when you don't do that is that when you like, this is the reason why I think the main reason why people have such like why Parisians have such a bad rap. There's this like international stereotype where you show up in Paris and people treat you like crap. And they're just like, well, no, Donnie, why are you even trying to speak our language? Get out of this restaurant kind of vibe. But it's because like typically Americans show up into French restaurants and they're like, bonjour, je m'appelle George. And to the French ear, it's not like you're insulting this language or you've taken our grand heritage and you've violated it with your, terrible accent. You've just said something unintelligible. And someone is looking at you expectantly being like, hey, like I just said French, shouldn't be proud of me. And actually you didn't say French. You said a bunch of gobbledygook. And then you're staring at this person being like, praise me, or like, give me the thing I asked for. And they're like, you just said a bunch of random syllables that mean nothing in any language. Bonjour doesn't mean anything. No one says bonjour in any place. That's not a word. And bonjour sounds completely different. And so when you learn a language and you don't think about the pronunciation aspect, then literally every time you learn or say bonjour, you are digging a groove in your brain to say that more and more often. And later, a year later, 5 years later, usually it takes people like when they're learning in these kind of really inefficient ways, it takes them 5, 6, 7, 10 years, maybe never, to get to a place where they can try to hold a conversation. They've spent 5, 6, 7, 10 years saying bonjour. And then finally someone's like, hey, like it's bon. Can you say bon instead of bon? And they're like, yeah, I think. And eventually they can get to the point where they can say bon. But they've said bon 10,000 times and they've said bon twice. And at any moment that they need to speak quickly, they're going to go back to bonjour and they're going to be unintelligible. Similarly, when they are listening to French people speak, if you can't hear the sound on, then every time someone uses a nasal on in any word, which is all over the place in French, it's one of the main vowels, they're going to hear confusion. This is one of the reasons why, like that earlier example from Hungarian, I like that example of, this was fénykép ezőgép for camera, is that word involves a whole bunch of sounds that most people have never learned to hear because no one cares about Hungarian. Like it's a very rare language for people to care about. And so when you encounter a word that has a bunch of foreign sounds in it, your brain filters that out immediately as this is a thing I cannot comprehend and therefore will not comprehend. You'll find Japanese speakers, for instance, won't be able to remember words involving like R's and L's in them very well, because Japanese has one d sound and they can't tell the difference between rake and lake. And so because their sound is right in between those two, there's we have r, we have l, and Japanese has a d right in between. And so since they have just one, every time an English word comes out where they hear vagueness, they're just like, this is something, but it's not what I'm familiar with. They can't remember the word. And so that means all the rakes and all the lakes and every single word with any R or L in it in the entire English language is extra hard for every Japanese speaker to learn unless they fix that at some point. And so for the entire duration of their learning, because most of them have not spent time building up that ear training component and actually learning how to pronounce these things correctly and hear them correctly, they are at a disadvantage to learning every one of those words forever. These are the things where you're like, you get screwed from the start. Like you get screwed before you even began just because you didn't do things in the right order. And so for me, that ends up being kind of one of the most like insidious errors people make just because they don't know to fix it.
Do you think part of that actually lies with embarrassment of maybe getting it wrong, but also kind of stumbling on their own feet anyway because they're getting it wrong by just saying it in this kind of natural way in their native language? Or do you think it's a laziness of doing it, or it's an unintelligence of doing it? What might be a barrier that's stopping people from wanting to learn pronunciation? Or do you think it's just maybe it's not put forward as, I guess, common in language learning as a fundamental thing to get right first? I wouldn't say I've seen people say that that's the first thing to focus on, because you go to the textbooks, learn the words,
right?
X, Y, Z.
I think it's the latter. I think it's that people don't know. I think there are cases where people don't care, or people. It's a mixture of things. I think it's mostly people don't know that they're able to start there, or that would be advantageous. I think secondarily, there is, I think, a cultural myth that it can't be done. That one's, I think, the worst one. People have these ideas that like, oh, I'm past the age of 7. Like the number keeps changing. It's like 12, 7, 5, like whatever the number you pick. That was the critical year. If I didn't learn this by the age of 7, I'll never have a good accent. Like that's often like traded around the internet as a truth. Like this is just, well, that's the thing. There's evidence for this. This is the truth. And every single opera singer I've ever met has been able to generate a good accent in a language. And opera singers are random. These are not some special, you don't have like a genetic test to be an opera singer. You just go learn to sing. And so basically you can't learn a new accent unless you're paid for it. And then you can. Like that's the argument I'm actually seeing, is that everyone who's paid for it is able to do it, but no one who's not. Like then it's a genetic issue. You can't do, like, this is ridiculous. Like pronunciation is learnable. The idea that there is but this quote unquote fact that it can't be done, I think gets in people's way a lot. And then I think maybe the third piece is just, well, then how? I don't think there's a clear how that people have access to. The idea that if you get the story that like the thing you need to do is learn pronunciation first, and that's going to improve your memory of every word from that point forward, and so you'll learn faster and you'll get better comprehension and you'll have great habits in terms of your pronunciation, and you'll learn faster, you'll understand faster, all this stuff. Like you can, with a little bit of discussion, you can get behind that idea of like, oh, cool, I should do that. But then what? What do you do? How do you learn pronunciation? Like, that's not obvious. The idea of I can go to a textbook and memorize a bunch of words, that's obvious. I know that languages are composed of words. I know that there's books full of words. I should go learn those books. Like there's a clear to-do list there. But if I tell you learn pronunciation, there's not. And I think in it's like 2013, it was the book took 2 years to write. And 2012, I was like, I know this is important. And then by 2013, my editor was like, your methodologies here suck. Like you can't just tell people go be opera singers. that's not a good solution. Like, and I started looking into like the research of like, well, how do you teach pronunciation really well? And at that point, no one was using it. Like there were methods and no one was using them. It turns out that the way to teach a Japanese adult how to hear the difference between rake and lake is to say rake and lake at random at them. And then they need to guess whether you said an R or L. And then you need to tell them whether they got it right or wrong. And you need to do that for a few hours. And there's like really nice, clear research in the early 2000s being like, this is how you fix it. And then no one built any products with that. And so without that, like, what do? You just go on YouTube and just listen to a bunch of people and try to repeat them? That doesn't work. I mean, if you go to a Japanese speaker and you're like, just say rake. I'm just going to say rake. You say rake. You go rake, they go dake. And you go rake, and they're like dake. And you're like lake, and they go dake. They say the same thing. And you're like, well, no, those are different. I'm going to say rake and lake. And they're like, okay, dake, dake. And you can have that conversation forever. And it will actually be forever. The same researchers that did the early 2000s thing, they tried this without that method. They were just like, let's just have them repeat it a bunch. Let's do all sorts of stuff. None of the other ones worked. There are no other interventions we're aware of that will train ears in the same way as I tell you a word at random, you tell me which one I said. And so I think people tend to be kind of stuck because they don't know about this research. I didn't know about this research until I was a bit like halfway through writing a book about the thing. Even if they do know about this research, which almost no one does, then like, well, what are you going to do about it? Where are you going to get all the rakes and lakes in your target language? How long does it take for you to assemble that thing? What are you going to assemble it in? Are you going to write an app for this thing? Like, what are you going to do to give you this exposure? So I think these are the reasons why people get stuck. It was a lot of what I did in the early, like, year or two after the book came out was like trying to fix this thing, like start posting things on my blog, be like, here's how you make it yourself. Here, I'm going to make you some early versions. Like, I'm going to put them in this flashcard tool that's free. Like, just here, take it. Get these resources because they're so vital and they change everything and they didn't exist at that time. So a lot of barriers. I think there's a lot of reasons why people don't do this thing.
Yeah, I think the methods of how people learn, a lot of what we're talking about, but we will talk more about, is sort of the methods of how people learn and comprehend and absorb the information. I think absorption's one thing. I think you can even take yourself out of language learning, right? And any sort of comprehension or learning and absorption, real absorption of the information and holding on to it is a pretty big challenge for a lot of people, especially now, I think, in the modern world we live in. So with all of the methods that you have come up with and worked on and developed and for yourself and other people, is there a favorite, an order that you like going in that you find is most effective?
I will start with 10 days of ear training in any language. I need to get those sounds in my ear before I have any shot of remembering anything. And so I just start there. There's no reason not to start there. So I start there. Like back in 2014, I had this like list of 625 words and I would start there and like, which is just kind of a very common list. Everyone needs the word for water. Everyone needs the word for like beer, usually is actually like the other liquid that people tend to use, like laptop. There's a bunch of words that are very, very common. And at that time I was starting with those. But in the decades since, I started moving really in the direction of personalization. There is this idea of words having life, like it links closely to this idea of this filter. They're the same thing, basically. There's just the flip of each other. Like if a word is filtered out, you can't remember it. If a word has life, you can remember it, and it's not filtered out. But those filters have, there's levels to them. There's 4 filters, basically. There's a filter about, just trying to remember abstract spellings and like random characters. I have a random string of letters and it's my email password. Like that stuff's crazy hard to remember. That's filtered out right at the start. I give you some sounds, mognog, and I don't tell you what they mean. Like that's pretty meaningless to you, and because you don't actually know what it means. And so that thing's going to get filtered out. but you'll keep twice as many of them as you will like random email passwords. Um, when I give you a word and you really know and feel what it means, and the trick for that is to use images. And so I say kutya, and I show you a picture of a bunch of kutyak, and they're a bunch of dogs, but they're like Hungarian dogs. You just like, this isn't quite the same dogs as I would be familiar with. They're like a little kind of more like not as many purebreds. It's just a bunch of little mutts and stuff, and you're like, okay, kutyak, I get it. So this is kutya. Now words have meaning. That's the life barrier. Like suddenly this thing is real. And so when words have images, now they're actually memorable. And so you remember twice as many words with images as you will that just start just translations or random sets of sounds that you don't really care what the meaning is. Like, basically any kind of translation work lives at that second filter, that sound filter of just like, this doesn't mean much to me, so I'm just going to remember the sound. Anything with an image, that one you'll remember twice as well. So that's the point where you're really starting to retain stuff. But if you can get one level further and make it personal, and so instead of, kutya looks like just some dogs, but instead kutya looks like my dog. And you're maybe learning it in the context of a sentence like a kutya Norbert, where you're like, this is this dog's name is Norbert, this dog is Norbert. That will be remembered about 50 to 100% more than just the images alone. And so at that point, you're like 4 times more memorable than translations. And so between 2014 and now, my focus has drifted a lot towards, how much can I make personal? Can I have every sentence be about my life? Can I never learn a word without some connection to a memory I already have or something that matters to me? Like, can I just make literally every single sentence be meaningful and like about me or about my friends or about something that I actually would say in real life? And what I found was, yeah, that thing works. Like those filters are they're no joke. You remember them easily 50%, most of the time 100% better than even just images. And so what I've been doing when I start out a language is, instead of going for this 625 word list of very common things and learning my waters and my whatever, like I'll get to those eventually, and I'll learn them in real sentences of being like, this is my water bottle, and like I care about water, and here's the word for bottle. But before even that, I'll pick a topic or two that I'm just super passionate about. For Japanese, I love sushi. I love eating. I went to Japan a few times, like it was all food. I love finding new foods to eat. Japan is heaven for food. And so I just started talking about sushi. I was like, I want to learn everything I can learn about sushi. And I actually, at that time, I was trying to throw kitchen sink at Japanese, because it was so hard of a language. And I was learning it in VR, and we like built a sushi restaurant. And we like walked through the sushi restaurant with my tutor in VR and like pointed at things. And we're like, how do I order? I want to order this thing. How do I order this? And so picking a topic or two that you just love, that everything is not just a thing you can make a sentence for, but that you want to make a sentence for because you're like, holy shit, this is my favorite thing in the world. That allows you to get like some level of fluency, even dumb fluency, of just like, this salmon roll, this tuna, this tuna eat, I eat tuna, like just like 2-word sentences. Where you start developing some like, oh, I actually can talk about this thing. I care about this thing enough that I could talk about it. And the second you're not talking about sushi, you're a mess and you don't know a damn thing. And that's fine. But you build this island, I call it. And then you build a second island of something else you're super passionate about. And suddenly you have these 2 little spikes that are like floating above the surface, where you're like, I can talk about sushi all day. Shitty sentences, stupid sentences, but I could use them, and I could talk about it, and I care about it. And I could talk about anime or something all day long. This one specific anime series that I really, really care about. I could talk about ninjas and Naruto, and I can just like really, really go for it. And suddenly you feel like you're capable, and you know what capable feels like. And then, yeah, you can start building bridges between the islands, and you can start learning all the common words, and that starts filling up the surface, and you start getting things that raise above the surface that are not just in your little islands. And you can maybe talk about your name, or how are you doing, or all the normal stuff that people begin a language with. But instead of beginning with, hi, how are you? My name is blah, blah, blah. You are beginning with, I can hold a real conversation about ordering sushi because I actually want that. Like, it's a thing I care about. And so I like that trajectory because you're always interested. And language is such a marathon. You cannot sprint your way through a language. That if you can't maintain your interest and feel like you are accomplishing things from day to day, then how are you supposed to keep going into month 3 and month 5 and year 2 and year 4? Like, that's just too hard.
That for me has been probably a massive piece, a real critical piece, because someone gave me the advice of try immersion in terms of start listening to music, put a Netflix series on that is in Spanish, and eventually you're just immersing yourself in the language. You may not understand what's going on, you might maybe understand the gist of it, but you're immersing yourself in it. But I didn't really find that was helpful because I felt I was just doing something for the sake of doing it. It's kind of when you have a podcast on in the background and it's just noise, it's just over there, but you're not really learning anything. And then you kind of finish it and you go, did I actually learn anything that came out of that? Was I really paying attention? Because you weren't really paying attention, but you also maybe were engaged in other, and that's, yeah, we could talk about multitasking and task switching, but my point is that I actually found something really helpful. In Spanish, there was an author called Cristina Lopez. She created these books. I actually forget the name of the book, but it's about a trip. It's like a trip to Madrid. Is the trip to Madrid the first one? Then the trip to Barcelona is the second one. But there are these scenes that are broken up, and then they're brought to life through questions, and as in, what did you learn in that last scene? But I didn't really get into it until about the 5th chapter, where I was starting to get the gist of the Spanish, but then I understood the story, because the story got interesting. It was a bit of gossip, and it was a bit fun and exciting, and then I started to really grasp it. I really started to grasp the language much more because there was interest, and I felt like I was going somewhere. And so I guess, how do you navigate those plateaus within language learning? Because you can start off and go, I'm getting somewhere, I'm learning it. Oh, I can say, hi, how are you? I can say all of these things. But then there's a moment where you kind of go, I don't feel like I'm going anywhere. I don't feel like I'm progressing, or I'm losing interest, losing motivation. How do people navigate those plateaus in motivation and learning when it comes to learning a language?
So there is, what is the curve called? The Yerkes-Dodson curve. This was added in the new revision, which basically says that if something is easy, it is usually boring. If something is of slightly less easy, it's still kind of boring. It's hard to get yourself to do a thing that you're just like, this is fine, whatever, I can do this all day. As you increase the challenge of something, there's a sense of engagement and actually performance that goes up. Your ability to remember things and like use this thing effectively goes up and up as it gets harder and harder. But then the curve tips over, and then something starts getting too hard. And now it starts getting frustrating, and eventually it starts getting angering, and eventually it becomes completely demoralizing, and you're just like, I hate this. I don't want to do this ever again. And so your ability to navigate that curve ends up being kind of one of the most central things about this long-term marathon part of the language thing. How do you keep things challenging enough that you're like, yeah, I did it, and it was hard, but I did it, and I feel accomplished. How do you stay there instead of, this is boring and I get this, I don't care, versus I'm completely overwhelmed and I hate this and I never want to do it again. When you throw, a Chinese news broadcast in front of a person who doesn't speak Chinese, like, that's just too hard. That will be filtered out. Like, there's no reason why someone would pay attention to that thing. The idea of someone like staring at a news broadcast being like, I'm going to get this, when they know 0 words of Chinese. It is a very rare person that's going to be like, yeah, give me more of that thing. That person is an academic masochist, or an academic masochist who is also a linguist and has enough tools to maybe get something out of that. It's like, oh my God, they said this thing over and over and over again. I bet that's like some kind of article, an indefinite or definite article. I bet that's how that works. And like they start piecing the language apart from what they're hearing. That's a 1 in a million person. 999,999 people will stare at that news broadcast and be like, fuck you. Like, no, I'm not going to listen to this thing. Same deal with, I'm going to listen to this book on tape, this podcast in Spanish when I don't speak any Spanish, this Harry Potter novel when I can't even read any Spanish. Like, these are all just too difficult. And so the idea of saying, okay, well, I'm going to look at really defined chunks and I'm going to set really clear goals for myself. And I'm going to make sure that they're not too challenging and not too easy, is the art of this thing. And so in terms of like next steps after this idea of island building, which is easy comparatively because you're like, I love this thing. I'm going to talk about it all day. So because you're passionate about it, you're going to find a way to make it right at the tip of that curve, right at the sweet spot. But eventually, you're going to want to graduate to things like books, podcasts, movies, things like that. And usually those are too hard. And so you have a couple of options there. One of your options is learn more stuff before you get there. And so if you can set up learning vocabulary or learning grammar or doing both of those at the same time using sentences, which is what I prefer to do, and usually sentences about my life, which is what I really prefer to do, then you can just kind of sit there for a long time. And that actually is a pretty clear and easy path towards conversation, because if you if you have a tutor, and like one of the nice things about living in the age that we do is that you can use language exchange of, I'm going to help someone with their English in exchange for them helping me with my whatever Japanese, to get tutoring for free. Or you can go on like italki.com and get tutors for like $5 to $10 an hour. And so it's a neat age to get connected to people. It's a neat age to get resources that we never had 20 years ago. But if you're working with these kinds of native speakers, either through exchanges or through paying them, and you're working on stuff about your life, then you can just say, hey, today I want to talk about my dog. Help me. I'm gonna talk about Norbert. I'm gonna say he's kind of grumpy right now, and so he's kind of a grumpy little dude. Can you help me say he's a grumpy little dude in Swahili? And so we're gonna talk about Norbert. We're going to learn all about him. We're going to spend an hour just focusing on my dog. I'm going to learn all that vocabulary later on with flashcards. I'm going to do that again. I'm going to keep doing that with all these different topics. And then eventually now, like, I'm able to talk about most things in my life because I've memorized all that stuff and I cared about it the whole time. At that point, you're in a pretty good place to actually have a real conversation about your life because you became an expert in talking about your life. That's a nice place to be. You can talk about that all day. You might even decide you're done at that point. You're like, I feel good. I can just talk for an hour about my life in the target language. I'm good. Or you can say, hey, I want to get good at this language. I want to be able to watch movies, which are not about my life. I want to read books, which are also not about my life. And at that point, you can take the book content and you can take it to that tutor or that source of content. Nowadays, you can probably, like, we're starting to get to the point where you can start leveraging the LLMs and ChatGPT and stuff to do this too. And you can say, hey, like, this is what the book is about. I want to be able to read this book or this movie, whatever. Can we find the top 100 words in this book? If I'm reading Harry Potter, can I learn how to talk about wizards? Can I learn about wands? Can I just kind of skim this chapter and be like, every time I hit a thing that I have no idea what the hell it is, I just circle it. And that's my only goal, is like look through the chapter and find words you're completely confused by. You're not reading for content. You're not reading, like, your goal, your challenge is find the stuff that confuses you instead of read the book. Now it's not overwhelming. Now it's like, yeah, I can get that challenge. And so you're setting, like, just by changing the goal, you're making it less overwhelming. And you're like, okay, I found 50 words that are just like drive me crazy. And then you take them to your tutor, to your ChatGPT, to your language exchange partner, whatever. And you're like, let's do 50 new concepts about wizards and wands and butterbeer or whatever. And then you go back to that book. And once you've had a bunch of conversations about wizards and wands and whatever, suddenly that book is within reach, and suddenly you can follow for the plot, and you can have the experience you talked about where you're like, oh, this is about gossip and this is kind of fun and I kind of like it. And then you get the real immersion experience because you care about it. It has the life that you want to have in there. Like all this stuff starts working.
That for me was something I struggled with language exchange, and I wish I'd had this conversation with you earlier. I found going into so I did language exchanges in Barcelona, and I got caught up in the embarrassment of not being able to talk about anything because I couldn't have a conversation past introducing myself, telling them how old I was, where I was from, what I do. I mean, I really fell down that way. But the way you've just articulated that is having some form of structure, but honing it around it. And do you know what? Why I didn't think about this is as an athlete, the way you learn a skill or you develop a broad range of skills, especially as a professional athlete. And I'd almost actually say this is the difference between someone who is a professional athlete and someone who kind of can get there, but just never makes it. Is professional athletes are very good at finding one skill and then honing in on it for a serious amount of time and effort, and then not moving on to the next one until they feel confident about that one, or layering other skills on top of very foundational skills that are important to them. But more often than not, that first skill that they learn is massively central towards them being unique, authentic, or that's their strength. For example, it might be a tennis player and their forehand is their real strength. It's their weapon in their arsenal. They know they can win more points than they lose on it, right? So then they focus on that and they hone that. They get really good at that before they start developing some form of backhand that ends up being Federer-esque or whatever it might be, right? And it's kind of like that. The way you've described that is that the way I maybe have I've misstepped coming into language exchanges by not saying, right, I'm going to just talk about my dogs, and I'm going to talk about my work, or I'm going to talk about this, and let's do it together. Because I always found, how do you communicate and have that language exchange? How am I going to teach you English? How are you going to teach me Spanish? Like, how is that going to work? And that way you've brought that to life is bringing some form of a structure to it.
I think your sports reference here is spot on. Like it's just learning. This is just how we learn. And we don't know how to learn. No one tells us. The thing in sports is that you tend to have a coach. And that's the person who generally comes to you saying, hey, like your forehand is great. Keep working on your forehand and let's make it harder. And I'm going to make you do a forehand from this terrible angle 100 times in a row. And then I'm going to throw it from this other terrible angle, and you're going to have to do the forehand for 100 times in a row. And like, we're going to make this harder and harder so it's not boring. So you're not sitting in the easy part of that Yerkes-Dodson curve. You have a person there to guide you. And in language, you generally don't. You're just kind of on your own, and you don't know what to do. And you show up in a language exchange. And of course, the first thing you do is you're like, hi, my name is this. And you're doing small talk, which no one cares about. Small talk is not interesting to anyone. And then you do it again next time. You just keep doing small talk. It's like, so what did you do this week? No one cares. You don't care, and your partner doesn't care. And so if you don't have someone there to coach you in terms of like, no, let's give you some structure. Let's talk about what you need to talk about. Then your language exchange partner has no shot at giving that to you. Why would they know? And so you have two people who don't know what they're doing, because why would they, attempting to build curriculum when they don't know that that's the goal. And then you have a kind of crappy conversation, and then you're like, man, I suck at language learning, or you come up with all sorts of conclusions from that interaction that are not like, man, I wish someone had just given me a curriculum and a structure to go do. So it's tricky. It's like, it's a trap. Like, I feel like people get so stuck in this thing. And it's so easy to land on, I must be bad at this. When in fact, you're like, this is a really hard thing. This is probably the most data you will cram in your head than any other subject, really, in a short amount of time. It's the most data dependent thing. Like, you can't just look up words in a dictionary and become fluent by being able to look up words fast enough. Like, it's all got to be in your head. And so you're asking people to do a thing that is really quite impressive and hard with no guidance. And then people fail and they're like, oh, I must be bad at it. And you're like, you're not bad at it. You just didn't know because no one said anything. So that's like, I don't know. I feel like that ends up being the reason why language is so drew me in so much. Initially, it's because it was like fun to think in new ways and like, wow, I can just like think in French and I turn into a different person and like, this is cool. I'm like accessing, it's a lot of self-discovery stuff, but over time it ended up being this idea of just like, wait, but like, this was such a fun experience for me and no one else gets access to this because no one else knows how. Like, that's so fixable. You could just tell people how to do it and suddenly they're good. Like, and so that became really, I don't know, that drew me in really hard for I don't know, the decade between 2014 and 2024.
What do you think is a realistic sort of time frame for people to start grasping it to some degree, whether that's through your own experience? I know your experiences with different languages have changed in the time that it's taken you to get to the certain fluencies, but I just spend so much time around people that are talking about learning, and then you get people that might sort of Instagram highlight reel it and say, oh, I became super fluent in 2 months and 3 months and I'm all good over here.
Yeah.
So I guess where do you think is this realistic level for someone to not, the expectation level that someone can set on how quick they can learn a language?
So if you're talking about English speakers, and then there's a lot of good data about which languages are harder versus easier. And it's not about the language being harder, it's about its distance from English. So Japanese is as far from English as you can get. Esperanto is actually this weird outlier of being as close to basically every European language in English as you can get, but that one.
What language was that?
Esperanto is a constructed language, and so there's actually like millions of speakers worldwide, and it's a very like.
I have never heard of that.
Yeah, they decided to make a grammar system where everything is perfectly regular, where every verb conjugates in exactly the same way, that they use the most common like Latinate word to mean everything. And it was designed to be the world's language. It was like, let's make a language that everyone can learn very quickly and that everyone can speak. And it actually took off a fair bit. And so you can, if you become fluent in Esperanto, like run around China, run around France, run around everywhere and find people who will speak fluently with you. And they're coming from every possible background. And so it's a cool, weird niche thing. And Esperanto is twice as easy as any other language for really anyone who comes from a Romance language background or English. It's just this weird like side thing. And some people learn Esperanto first. When you have people who are just like, I dream of being a polyglot. I want to learn 5 languages and I want to just be able to speak all these things. Some of them who are really strategic about it, these tend to be the kind of like engineer-y, Redditor kind of people, which is certainly where I came from. Those folks will sometimes be like, if I'm gonna get my way to 5 languages, I'm gonna start with Esperanto because every time you learn a language, you learn the next languages faster. And so if you can get one for almost free, which is what Esperanto kind of promises, then you start there, you get that one really, really quick, and you're like, cool, now I'm fluent in a language. Now I speak 2 languages, English and Esperanto or French and Esperanto, whatever. That's going to make languages 3, 4, and 5 much faster. And so people do that thing. It's a super nerdy language. I have not learned it. I've learned about it. But Esperanto aside, for English speakers, the Romance set, Spanish, French, some like German actually is not in the first level. It's really just the Romance languages. Those are going to be your easiest ones. They'll take you a certain amount of time. We'll talk about that time in a second. German will take you 50% more. Then you get to level 2. Level 2 are languages that are kind of distant. So like your Russians, your Hebrews, your Greeks, your Hungarians. Those will take you twice as long as a French or a Spanish. And then you get to the next level up, and those are your Japaneses, your Chineses, your Arabics. And those will be 4 Frenches or 2 Russians. And so like that's your unit of time is like 1 French. And so if you're giving French like an hour or an hour and a half a day, which is to say a real commitment, you're like, I want this thing, I'm going to get it. It is pretty reasonable if you're doing it correctly, meaning like if you're following all the steps in the right order, to get French down in about 6 months. If you cut that time down, you're giving it a half hour. I think it's pretty reasonable to get that in about a year. Now, by get that, I mean that you're hitting about like the Europeans have a scale, the CEFR scale, like I don't remember the name, it's Central European I don't remember, De Long, I think. There's A1, A0, I mean, I don't know damn thing, A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. C1, you can generally go to any college. Like you're able to function and be admitted to a college in that language. I showed up to Austria as a C1 German speaker. It was terrifying. C1 is not, I feel great. C1 is, I know a lot of stuff. And so there will be a learning curve. And so like, I think one of the tricky things about languages is how do you measure these things when the word fluency just means I feel good. And you could be fluent with like 20 words and you could be never fluent because you never feel good because you're an anxious person. Like that thing is hard. But the CEFR levels are nice because they're testable. And C1 is pretty, like most people recognize that thing as fluent, even though you might not feel good. C2 is you are really, really like, you can handle a variety of styles. You can write academic, you can write in poetry. You can just like, you're good at all the things. You're likely a more knowledgeable speaker, maybe not a better speaker, but a more knowledgeable speaker than non-college people in that country. So C2 is like really, really, really impressive. B2 is what I usually think of as like, this is pretty functional fluency. You can talk about most stuff. You'll run into problems when you run into problems. Maybe you're not ready for college, but like, that's usually not everyone's goal. Like you can just kind of chill in that language and do your thing. And so that B2 level is what will take you about 6 months if you're giving it like an hour and a half a day in a French kind of language, or a year if you're giving it about a half hour a day in also a French or Spanish kind of language. Double that if it's Russian, quadruple that if it's Japanese.
You've spoken a lot about space repetition as a part of that. So for people that don't, I guess, know what space repetition is, if you could just talk a little bit about how that is as a method and what it is.
So spaced repetition are sexy flashcards, which is really hard because flashcards are not sexy. But there's something magical about them, which is that we, I think, generally don't think of memorization as an activity. And it's not clear what to do. When someone says, hey, like, here's 10 names on a list, can you memorize them? Like, it's not obvious what the next step is. Usually what people do is they'll read the names off the list. They're like John, George, whatever, and they'll just keep saying the names over and over and over again. And like, that's to memorize. The verb to memorize is to, I guess, say it a whole bunch of times. And that actually is a terrible way to memorize things. It's really inefficient. It wastes a lot of your time. Your brain does not want to hold on to a list of 10 names. What is better is you have this list of 10 names and you see the first name is George. And then you read that thing and then you block it out. You put your hand over that you put your finger on top of that name. And then you read names 2 through 10. And then you go back to the beginning and you're like, that one was George. Cool. Let me block out items 1 and 2. And I'm going to read items 3 through 10 to distract me. And then I'm going to see, can I remember items 1 and 2? And it was like George and then John. And like that moment of, and you're reaching for something in your head, that is the action of memorizing. The time where you have the information, but it has faded a little bit. It has faded so it's not immediately easy for you. And then you're running after it to try to get it. And then you get it and you bring it back. That is the most efficient method we have for memorizing anything. And so flashcards, like, I think get a bad rap because everyone used them in school and they suck and they're these annoying little cards and whatever. But it's just a test. It's just, I blocked the name out with my finger. It just happens to be an efficient way to do that. And so you need to block names out with your finger. Like something needs to do that. Flashcards is a fine way to do it. If you have a computer program that can do it, whatever, like somehow you need to have that. And then the next thing was, what was it? This. You need to simulate that behavior over and over and over again. And so spaced repetition is what happens when you throw a computer at this problem. And you basically say, I have these 10 names. Initially, I can remember that George is the first one on that list for about a day. Like everyone listening to this podcast will probably remember that for, I don't know, 8 hours, something like that, because I've said George about 5 or 6 times at this point. But you probably will forget by tomorrow. And so the program is designed to, in about 8 hours from now, be like, hey, what was the first name that Gabe said in this list? And then you're like, George? And you're like, got it, cool. I'm going to test you again in 3 days. Because every time you do that and then thing, it's going to stretch your ability to hold on to that thing. And so you can probably handle, if you could handle 8 hours at first, if you got it, then you could probably handle 3 days next. And then 3 days come like we're days away, and suddenly it's like, hey, remember that podcast? Like there was a list of names. What was that thing? And you're like, so much has happened since then. Like, I don't think I remember, but let me check. And you check. And usually what you'll find is that the computer figured out the schedule just right. And you're like, that was George. I didn't realize I would remember that, but that's weird. But sure, it was George. And it says, cool, you can handle 3 days. Let's try 9. Let's try 15. Let's try 25. Let's try 39 days. Let's just like, it has an algorithm to kind of figure out the interval. And so it is about as efficient as you can get at drilling really anything into your brain. And the nice thing about spaced repetition programs is that they do that on a item by item basis. So I can make 10 different flashcards that are all tracked on 10 different schedules for those 10 different names. Because maybe, you know, one of the names is like Chopin and you just have a hard time with that one because it's unfamiliar. Maybe that one shows up more often. Every time you fail to remember a thing, it's going to repeat it faster. And so with language, there's going to be thousands of these. And so the idea that you can by hand keep track of how well you remember thousands of different items is not really doable. But a computer can keep track of that just really easily. And so spaced repetition programs end up letting you learn, when you're comparing it to like, I'm just going to read a thing a whole bunch of times, you learn, I think, about 4 or 5 times faster. It's 5 times faster. And when you're talking about a marathon kind of thing like language, you getting a tool that lets you learn 5 times faster is vital. I mean, that's you getting French in 6 months instead of you getting French in 2.5 years. Like, why would you waste 2 years of your life? So spaced repetition is pretty central. You got to use it. I mean, there's no reason not to use it. It's just, it's the best technology we have for remembering things.
Is there a great way of integrating it into then speaking and actually bringing it to life? So I've used one I personally used is Anki.
Yeah, everyone uses Anki. It's great.
Yeah, it is really good. I've actually downloaded Fluent Forever. I enjoyed the fact that there is visuals on that. We've spoken about that. But then bringing it to life, because again, there's this element of it that I guess I worry about, which is I'm just remembering words for the sake of remembering them, and then integrating them into conversation. Can it be done alongside it? What's the best way of doing that?
I don't put things nowadays. I've sort of stopped learning languages lately over the last year or two. But at the end of my Japanese studies, I would never have a flashcard that I hadn't first had a conversation about.
Okay.
I would always talk to a native speaker. We would make sentences about my life or things I cared about. Every time there was a new word in those sentences, that's what made a flashcard for me. And so those were reminders of a conversation I had. One of the things that is interesting about these flashcard tools is that they are as valuable as the experience they are reminding you of. They amplify that experience. They bring that experience back. And so if your experience of making of these flashcards is that you downloaded some flashcards, they had a bunch of translations on them, you downloaded them, then the experience that they are amplifying doesn't exist. And so instead, the experience they amplify is the moment you saw kucho, and you were like, I don't know what the hell that is. I've never seen that word in my life. And then you hit the space bar and it flips over, and most people are learning translations at that point and downloaded translations. And so it says dog. And you're like, okay, kucho, I guess means dog in Hungarian. Cool. That's fine. I don't care. And then you go to the next flashcard. Now, every time you see kucho, that first experience of I don't care is amplified. In contrast, when I go to my Hungarian tutor and we talk all about my dog Norbert, and then I learn how to do all these things, I discover the language through that conversation. I learn how the possessive works. It's not kutya, it's kutyam when I talk about my dog. And when I talk about my two dogs, it's kutyak. And so like, I'm like, oh, okay, this is how this language works. I'm like learning the subtleties of this thing just from talking about my own dogs. Now that sentence goes into my flashcard, or those two sentences go into my flashcards. And then when the flashcard comes up and it says kutyam, I'm like, A, I know that shit. This is Norbert. I get it. Like, this is my dog. But B, I'm like, I remember this like 10-minute kind of exciting conversation I had with Bobet, where he showed me all this stuff about kutyak. And I was like, this is cool. Like, this language is so weird. You just stick things at the end of words and they turn into different words. Like, what a weird construction. Like, this feels like a slot machine. You're just dumping things on. This language is insane. All of that emotion and like experience and fun comes back with this stupid little flashcard that says kutyam. And then I get to amplify that really deep experience or every single flashcard. And so when I'm looking through whatever 100 flashcards in a day, I'm bringing back 100 different conversations I've had. Whereas the person who just downloaded some flashcard deck is bringing back 100 really dull, unexciting experiences of looking at a flashcard and looking at the back and being like, I don't know. And so my flashcard experience is more fun, and I learn many multiples more than anyone else who's just sort of playing around with some translations they downloaded.
Yeah, really like that idea of integrating it with a live tutor alongside. And actually, that leads kind of nicely probably to a section I was thinking about, which was AI coming into language learning. And where do you sit on that? How much of it do you think is a good thing, and maybe how much of it a bad thing because you're diminishing the amount of human interaction that comes with language learning? So where do you sit with AI and language learning?
AI is, to me, so like I could talk about AI for hours, and I don't want to like bog your thing down, but like AI is an incredible tool, and I think its origins are also just like they're so built up in the topic we've been talking about. The idea, like what has come out of this AI revolution is that we came up with a way to make to basically digitize the meaning, these embedding models, and then we stuck a bunch of content in a box, and then what we see coming out looks like intelligence, and it's like the thing that is this is language coming to life for me. Like this is what that is. You jam enough language in a box, and what comes out resembles us as humanity. And so like there's tons to talk about in there, but in terms of as a tool, I think they were extremely powerful a year ago. They're even more powerful now. Should they replace all human speakers? No. Like, talk to people, like have real interactions. You're going to have, in terms of these flashcard experiences of like, this reminds me of this cool conversation I had with my tutor, Robert. Like that was fun, and that was a person, and I liked interacting with that person. And my flashcards are so much more exciting because of that interaction. But he's not available all the time, and I don't have infinite funds. And there is a tool that's just going to sit there patiently waiting for me every minute of every day, willing to talk about anything I want all the time, and willing to take the time to be like, hey, like you just said kutyak. Why? I thought it was kutyo. And it will just sit there in any format you want in terms of like, please explain this to me in slow Hungarian. No, please explain this to me in English. Please explain this to me in a mix of Hungarian. Please explain this to me however I want you to explain it. It will do it. And it will slowly piece apart everything I care about. It is an infinitely patient teacher with imperfect knowledge. It will make mistakes. It will screw things up. It will give me wrong words from time to time. It will use them incorrectly. But also, so will a tutor. So will a textbook. It'll have errors in it. And so if like these tools are on one level insanely valuable, and on another level, you need to understand how to use them. You need to understand how to handle the idea that sometimes it'll be wrong. Sometimes it'll hallucinate. Sometimes it'll be very, very confident about all sorts of stuff that's complete garbage, which is also true about people. And so you need to be able to have a bullshit filter up all the time and navigate the fact that you can't trust everything that you see or hear. And you have to do that anyway. And so like you learning how to like tune a bullshit filter in a new language is a useful skill regardless. And so I think with some nuance, these tools are incredibly valuable. And I think they kind of democratize language learning a lot. The idea of spending a decade telling people get tutors, get tutors, get tutors, like that's nice, but not everyone can afford tutors. And the plan B I've had so far is, okay, get language exchange partners. But then you learn half as fast. You have to spend half your time speaking English. And that's hard. And so that's a big trade-off. And I don't like the idea that I'm either telling someone like, do this thing that's amazing and perfect, which is just talk to people, or take twice as long. Like that feels shitty. There's a sense of like, well, if you have the money for this thing, great, you can learn, but otherwise you have to learn twice as slow. I think these AI tools allow for, no, like you could still use a tutor, still involve people in your process, but know that you also have access to these infinitely patient tools that are getting twice as good, 10 times as good every year. Like that, I think is very democratizing, and I think really good for the field.
For me, it kind of feels like it's going to get you to a certain point, like you said, getting it to learning. But then at the end of the day, you have to ask, why are you learning a language?
Mm-hmm.
What is you want to talk to people. You want to,
sometimes
I'm not learning Spanish to talk to AI.
I mean, sometimes I feel like that's one of the things that's not always consistent is like, I think many people, yes, they want to learn a language to talk to people, but not all the time. There's some people who want to learn Russian because they think there's great works of literature in Russian, which there are, and they want to read those things. There's some people who think French film is amazing and they want to watch French film in French. And like, that's legit. I have a pulmonologist friend who, she works in ICUs. And so in almost all cases, her patients are intubated. They can't speak, they can nod. And so she has learned enough of, I think, like 15 different languages to do everything she needs to with a patient in terms of asking them questions, because all they can do is say yes or no. And so she has like a 100-word vocabulary in 15 languages. She is fluent in those 15 languages for her purposes. Like this is a 15-language polyglot. Can she speak about anything other than like, how are you feeling? Or not even how are you feeling? It has to all be yes or no questions. Like, does this hurt? Things like that. No, she can only talk about this super, super narrow thing. But for her purposes, she's fluent in 15 languages. I think the idea that it is okay to have completely different goals than other people, that you don't need to talk to people, that if the thing you want to do is read books and that's all you want to do, then like just learn some old ass language that like doesn't, like people want to learn Latin, like go learn Latin, go do that thing. No one speaks it basically. The opening up of goals and the validation of goals and saying that all of these goals are valid, languages are there for all sorts of reasons, I think can be very helpful for a lot of people where they're excited about one thing, but the thing that everyone tells them they need to do, which is you need to go to the country and travel. And so you need to be able to talk about buses and trains, and they're not excited about it. And so they get stuck. Like, I think that for me, it's really important to kind of open that up and be like, no, all these things are valid. If you can only just ask someone, does your left leg hurt? Great. Go ask about left legs. Like, do you? So yeah, I don't know. I think if the only thing you want to do with languages is talk to AIs all day, like, cool, do that thing.
What's on the horizon for you at the moment? What are you learning? What's coming up for you? Is it languages? Is it something else?
So we chatted about this a bit before the start, and there's a sense of the last decade for me has been dedicated to thinking. Language happens to be a really great place to think. It is one of these places of learning how to think and learn efficiently is going to serve you really, really well when it comes to language. And there's not a lot of places elsewhere where you need it that badly. Most things you could just look up. And if you can look it up, why do you need to memorize it? And so I've spent a decade becoming this expert in efficient thinking and learning. And then a few years back, I ran into a person who thinks better and more efficiently than anyone I've ever met. This was my prior CTO, Chief Technical Officer in my company. And I started investigating what's going on in his head, and it's crazy. Like, he is a systems architect. He's just like an introverted programmer kind of guy. But he is fundamentally content in his life. He's just happy. And I think sometimes I encounter people who are just happy, and it's like, that's just their disposition. That's whatever, like that happens. It's rare. Like, generally everyone's a little like traumatized by something. But this person engineered it for himself. He decided he would be happy, and then he decided to build a life in which he is content and happy. And the more I dug, the more I found depth to that thing. Like, he really built it for himself, and he built a whole system for building systems, for identifying what it is that he wanted in his life, what would make his life feel good, and how to maximize the amount of time that he's doing things that make him feel good and content and peaceful. And then he did risk analysis to figure out like what's going to endanger this sense of contentment. And then he made plans to not have those things happen, or to have plans for what happens when those things happen. Like, what happens if I lose my job, all this stuff. And so in digging enough, what I found is that he is using, like, since the 50s, really like since the advent of Toyota, the industrial world has glommed onto a set of principles of like how to deliver value and how to like capitalism, like how much can you extract value from systems, like this kind of thing. And more money has gone into like this idea of systems engineering and project planning than almost any other field of research ever. And it's all been used to generate money. And this guy is using it to generate contentment. And I want it. And so I've spent like 2 years working on a book proposal on this topic with him. And the last 6 months, I've been actually just doing the work. I spent like a year and a half not doing the work, being like, that looks hard, but I think it's a cool idea. The last 6 months, I've actually been doing it. And it is, it's changing everything. I'm just every day I am getting closer to the life I want. And I'm like, it's not a lot of work, ultimately. Now that I'm actually doing the work, I'm like, this isn't actually that hard. And I kind of love it. So it's this, like, I think lately I've been really focused on what happens when you use these knowledge and like learning acquisition skills for quality of life. And can you do that? And it really seems like you can. So I'm sort of my first test case. I think coming forward, once I put a few more months into this thing and be like, okay, I think this is a whole methodology. Like, I think I got this. Then I think we're going to start having some test cases of other people, and just see how well does this apply? What do we learn when we apply this to other people's lives? And then I think we're going to do a whole book thing on this crazy topic of like, can you use agile project management and like systems engineering to build a good life? So that's what's been capturing my attention lately.
Wow. I think of it in terms of learning just being as a tool that can almost make you feel better and good in general. And you kind of answered the question that I was going to throw towards you, which was, how was learning a language spilled out in terms of the rest of your life? And even for me, just at the very early steps of that journey, there's something to be said around the identity of being a learner and being someone who is learning. And while there's ends of that, right, there's the embarrassment and the ego that you have to get over in being a learner and having a beginner's mindset. And then there's something inquisitive and curious and developmental about being a learner at the same time, and being someone who seeks out new ways of doing things for yourself, because there's this, it feels good. We have this beautiful system within us that gives us that rush of when we learn something and we master it and we become good. Again, if it's, whether it's a sport, a language, a skill, hobby, whatever it might be, you just inherently feel good about it. So I feel like it can spill out more than just the language and the words that you're learning.
I think there's something to the human experience of discovery that I think in our current world, there is a sense that like discovery is for astronauts. Discovery is for people who discover for the first time. It's for scientists. It's you need to spend 20 years studying a thing and then you get to discover something. And then it means something because you're the first person to ever discover it. And it's important. And like, but I feel like that takes away from the idea that like there is a human archetype behind discovery. There's a sense of I went into this cave and I found a cool thing and I saw it for myself. Or like, I learned this word. I learned this cool phrase. And yeah, everyone says it, but I didn't know it until today. And now I know a new thing. And I didn't know that yesterday. And that feels good. And so discovery is, I think, essential to the human experience. Like, I think it's one of the things that gives joy in the world. And I think the modern emphasis of like, you have to be the best, the first, the one, the number one, in order for any of that to have meaning it's hard to get away from. But when you get away from that thing and you're like, no, learning is joyous. Discovery is joyous. If I want a life that has joy in it, it will include discovery. And so what can I discover today? And can I discover things about discovering? Like, can I discover things about myself? What can I learn that makes tomorrow better? Like that shit's fun. Like that's why we exist. And so I think language is a way to play around with that experience of discovery 10,000 times in a row, and can give you some perspective of like, oh, I liked that. I liked feeling like now tomorrow I'm dreaming in German, or a week from now I'm dreaming in German, and it's not stupid dreams, it's interesting dreams. And a month from now, 2 months from now, I'm watching some dumb Sesame Street thing in German, but it's kind of fun because I'm watching it in German. I didn't know I could do that. This idea of progress and discovery is a thing that's really, really like core to learning a language successfully. And it's what caught me onto the thing. I mean, I learned languages because I was an opera singer. But ultimately, I stayed an opera singer because I enjoyed learning languages. Like, I stayed in that thing way longer than I probably should have, because just language learning was so much fun. I could just keep doing the discovery thing all day, and I could justify it, quote unquote, because it was a career expense or a career or whatever, not realizing that you could just do it because it's fun. You didn't have to justify it all the time. Like, you could just decide that maybe learning things is the thing you enjoy, and maybe you just go do that thing. So language has broadened out quite a bit over the last decade or so in terms of where it's spilled out.
Where's the best place for people to keep up to date with what you're doing? Where should we send them?
I mean, fluentforever.com will be all the Fluent Forever stuff. That said, like, what was it? Did I change it to Gabe Wyner? I think it's gabewyner.com. So gabewyner.com will have kind of next book projects, this idea of an agile project management and stuff as a way to live your life. Those will be over there. So I believe that's gabewyner.com. I'll send you a correction if it's not.
Gabe, I appreciate your work. Thank you so much for coming on.
This has been such a pleasure.